If you want to be a saint, you need to begin by really knowing who you are. Many of us say we have faults and issues and say we are sinners with such self-indignation. But do we really know what our faults are? Do we just keep them at a very high level, distancing ourselves? So we never need to work on our vices, our faults, our sins. This process of knowing who we are is not just a one-time event, but a continual event that deepens and grows as we seek holiness and become a saint. This knowing yourself is not only good spiritually in growing holy, but also practically to become a better father, mother, husband, wife, manager, and employee. Hello everyone, today's episode is about how to truly know ourselves by using St. Thomas's Temperaments as described by Father Marin, and some cautions on how to effectively use them to grow spiritually and practically.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins last Sunday. Last Sunday's reading was about humility. And so it was funny because God always gives me the lesson, I guess, in Sunday Mass. And then he gives me a practical way of growing spiritually in that lesson. So when we were driving back home from the Mass, Sunday's Mass, my kids, it was only 4 of my kids. 2 of my kids are in college right now. And so they started making fun of me. And one of the things that I do is I allow that to happen. I know that maybe that's not the best thing for, because fathers must be these perfect person, but I am neither perfect nor a saint. I'm working on it and I'm growing into it. But I allow that because it helps me to be humble. And it also helps me to understand who I am and where I need to improve. I remember listening to a priest one time, and he said that it was a book that I read, and the book said, this priest said, the best way to know what your faults are is to listen to people who actually hate you, and because they'll be the ones who actually will be telling you the truth. Your friends sometimes don't tell you what your faults are, because they want to be your friends. There's some, buy-in. So they want to be the nice person. And as Catholics, we are, sometimes we're called to be kind. That's what we're called to be, and not nice. So the ones who are really kind are our enemies. So at this point, I'm not saying my kids are my enemies, but my children, they have no filter. So, and because they have no filter, they kind of are point blank in my faults. And they were just talking about how I can't communicate effectively. I get angry and frustrated very quickly. I, am very impatient with them when it comes to directions, when it comes to schooling. We homeschool at our house. So it was some sense comical. But I took it with even though I laughed and chuckled and it was funny, I took it and I wrote it down and I kept it in my mind, the things about me that I need to change, that I really needed to change and grow holier, all right? And it's funny because I could have leaned back and kind of ignored my kids and said, I am so much better than that. I really am. And the reason why was because one of the things that I had a big problem with growing up, and I still have, and I struggle with this a lot, is anger management. One day it'll be my own podcast story, but I had an anger management issue. And I remember the day that I first started getting angry, and that was, in high school, and I yelled at my father, and since that moment on, rage was kind of part of my persona. Sports exasperated that. The Marine Corps even exasperated that even more. And so, when I had a family, it was very easy to explode, especially when you have young kids and everything. And I knew that was a problem. So I overcame at least, what I thought I was overcoming. So, I really thought, wow, man, I really gotten better with this anger management. And now here are my kids just totally making fun of me about how, I still get angry. I still get, impatient and everything else. So lesson learned, I still have to improve. I still have to grow more in controlling my impatience, my frustration, and my anger. Yes, have I improved? Oh, greatly from where I started. But is there room for me to still and continue to grow? And the answer is yes, there is. One of the greatest lessons to learn, again, is sometimes our enemies are our best friend in helping to know ourselves. I want to read a little bit of St. Augustine's Confession, where he talks about how his mother, St. Monica, realized she was an alcoholic. All right? So the story basically is, the plot is that St. Monica was responsible at an early age to getting the wine from the cellar. And so when she would do that, she would slowly take a couple of sips, and then eventually those couple of sips became a couple of drinks and everything else. And so she eventually became an alcoholic at a very young age. So not realizing that, because, as a alcoholic, admitting that you're an alcoholic is half the battle. The other half is actually taking actions to cure that. So here is what St. Augustine writes about his mother. Let me read. For the maidservant who used to accompany her to the cellar, so she had a maidservant, falling out as it happens, meaning that her maidservant and her had a big fight, and they were not a best of terms. They were probably, hateful towards each other. And it says, falling out as it happens with her little mistress, when she was alone with her, cast in her teeth this vice with bitter insult. So, kind of giving you the backdrop. She has this mistress who's helping her bring up the wine, and she doesn't have the best relationship with this mistress, as St. Augustine's saying. So she's going to throw what we would call like a zinger at her, and just say how bad she is. And the way she says it, this mistress, is she calls her a wine bibber, a lush. In today's modern terms, it would be a lush. You're a lush, all right? And here is a woman who probably has a very reflective soul, and to hear that she's a lush, that she's a drunkard, stung very hard. Now, I doubt her friends ever thought about that. Her friends were probably getting drunk with her. Her friends probably, just said, I'm not going to confront her because it's not, it's not a nice thing for me to do. Who am I to judge, right? But it was exactly her enemy who wanted to hurt her so badly that she told the truth. So let's see what St. Augustine says. Stung by this taunt, she perceived her foulness. So meaning St. Monica perceived her foulness and immediately condemned and renounced it. Even as friends by their flattery pervert, so do enemy by their taunts often correct us. I love this quote. Even as friends by their flattery pervert, so do enemies by their taunts often correct us. So the taunts of our enemies are actually corrective. That's what my children were doing. They're taunts. They were actually correcting me. And that's how we have to look at it. Yet, let me continue. Yet you render not unto them what you do by them, but what was proposed by them. For she, being angry, dispute, found them thus, or perhaps lest she herself should be exposed to danger, for disclosing is so late. So in other words, what she's saying is, instead of being angry at the woman for her spite, this zinger that she gave, that you're a lush, that you're an alcoholic. She knew that she needed to be corrected about it. So the next time you think of your enemies and they throw you a zinger out of hate, you can convert that into a loving action by realizing that, yeah, maybe you do have these faults and you need to take correction on them. Okay? As St. Augustine would say. Okay? And a lot of times our friends are not truly our friends because they just flatter us. How many of us, when we kind of, do something ridiculous, our friends kind of like go, oh yeah, and rather than being open and honest. So the kindness sometimes comes from our enemies and not from our friends. So today's topic is about knowing ourselves. Okay, so I mentioned how we can know ourselves through the people around us, but I want to first talk about getting a foundation of knowing ourselves. So one of the key ways of getting our foundation is knowing our temperaments. There's this old adage: is it our environment or is it our biology? Is it biology or is it our environment that makes us? And the Catholic Church teaches us that it's both. It's not just our environment, but it's also our biology, how we are born, okay? So, and that we are to mesh those together, both the environment as well as our biology, to create a great saint. And that is called character building, okay? So when we combine the environment with our biology to perfect us, in the secular world, we call that character building, okay? In spirituality, we call it perfection. That's what we call it, seeking perfection, because our biology lacks certain things, okay? You got to remember, St. Augustine said that evil is not an object, okay? Evil doesn't exist. Evil is actually lacking in something, right? When we see a person who has no arms, or can't see, or is deaf, okay, it's not because deafness is something. Deafness is a lacking of something, which is the ability to hear. So evil is the same way. So we have to actually perfect who we are. We have to combine everything that we are to become that perfect, complete person. Perfect here comes from the Latin perfectio, which means to be complete. Doesn't mean no mistakes. We all make mistakes, and we will continue to make mistakes because we're human. But we can seek perfection to harness the power of the virtues and grace to make us complete. So one of the things that we have to understand is our temperaments. All right, our temperaments. So our temperaments is the baseline of who we are. It is the part that is the biological part. We are born with these temperaments. Now, why would God give us these temperaments, okay? God gives us these temperaments because this is the struggle that makes us a saint, okay? The more we work on them, the greater we become, and the greater we become that saint. All right? So there's always going to be a deficiency in our temperaments, or misuse of our temperaments in some cases, to become a sinner. So let me first talk about some cautions about temperaments, all right, and understanding. I always caution this, and the reason why is because I own a business. And a lot of times, a lot of businesses will use the, how do they call them, the type A, type B personality types, Brigmeyer's personality types. I try to use that in my company a couple of times. It wasn't very effective. I didn't like using them, mainly because of the fact that they don't talk about the inner drive or ownership by a person. So So that's what is the biggest issue that happens. So, but I want to talk about these temperaments in the context of knowing who you are and to have a baseline of that. So here's a caution, the first caution, okay? We can't use these temperaments as an excuse or a crutch, okay? I've met a lot of people who do that. Well, that's just my temperament, or that's just my, crutch. That's who I am. That's how God made me, okay? And that's true. That's how God made you, but that's not what God wanted you to remain as, okay? God, we were born with no intelligence, okay, and no ability to, be an Einstein, all right? So we weren't all knowing baby, but he gave us the raw materials such as the intellect and the will and the ability to reason and our memory so that we could become intelligent, so we could learn, right? So just because we were born that way doesn't mean God wants us to stay that way. So we can't use the temperaments to kind of being an excuse or a crutch. And I see so many people who do that. That would be like saying, you know what, I was born a dummy, not knowing things, so I'm going to stay that way. And I'm not going to use my intellect. I'm not going to use my will. I'm not going to use my, memory to and ability to reason to become smart. And that is totally wrong, okay? God has given us gifts and graces and, examples and great theologians and great saints as examples to grow become a saint through those temperaments, okay? So no excuses, no crutches. We don't use these temperaments. We use it as a baseline so that we can grow in them and to know ourselves. Number two caution, try to understand, and a lot of people do this too, is they say, well, I'm a caloric, or I'm phlegmatic, or I'm this, I'm that. And some people will say, well, I don't know what I am because I'm not predominant one thing or the other. We have to understand that we do not fit one type of temperament. Now, there's a dominant temperament, all right, more or less. There's, a dominant one. But don't think that, like, I am strictly a phlegmatic or I'm just, I'm strictly this type of temperament. It's not. Usually, we have a dominant one, and then we have a little bit of the others. So that's why it kind of feels a little confusing, right? So we have to, in essence, not be so rigid in its definition and, put us in there. So what we got to understand is that we have a predominant, more or less, and then we're a little bit of all the others. Now, the utopia about that is that we are called to actually personify the best of all four of these temperaments. That's our goal, okay? Our goal is to personify all of the four temperaments and its and all the perfect parts of it, all the good qualities, so that a person who actually meets you will never know that your predominant disposition is this, okay, is one of the temperaments. Because between the virtues that will help you draw you closer to the other ones, it will mask your predominant one, okay? So don't think that we are, in one single category, because we're not. The third caution is do not judge others with these temperaments. This is one of the biggest problems I had with using the Myers-Briggs personality types, was that they would just judge other people. Well, because of this, you are this, and you are this, and you are that. Now, I don't like doing that because one of the things we have to understand is people need to grow. And when we judge other people by those temperaments, we're actually pigeonholing them, and we're not allowing them to grow. Now, we can use it as a way to help communicate a little bit more effectively. We can use it to help us understand the other person. But we can't judge other people based off of that, Because you're a phlegmatic, this is how you're going to be, okay? That's not what it is. All right? The fourth caution, don't use them to manipulate others. That was another reason why I stopped using the Brigmeyers. It is, how can I say this? We can use it to manipulate people, all right? And that's not good. It's never good to manipulate people, just generally speaking. But to then use these temperaments to kind of manipulate them is not. Now, again, as I said, you can use it to effectively communicate with people, but communicate open and honestly with people, not to manipulate people. The other is we use it as a baseline, okay? We're using our temperaments as a baseline so that we can grow, right? A baseline just says, here's where we start from, and then we move forward with it. Okay? The sixth is, in the end, what matters the most, and I want to say this, okay, is that no matter what, the most important trait we need to have is humility, bold, drive, ownership, and problem solving. To me, I don't care what kind of personality you have, okay, or I'm sorry, the temperaments that you have. What matters to me is, are you humble, which means are you willing to change? Are you bold? You're willing to take that chance. Do you have drive? Drive, get things done, ownership, and problem solving. And the reason why that is the most important is because, as I said, these temperaments, okay, is what is a baseline. And the way that we grow in holiness, the way that we grow, to perfect ourselves is based off of those characteristics that I just talked about. Humility, bold, drive, ownership, and problem solving. Because if you have those, you'll be able to become a saint. Okay? So so that's really, really the most important. That's why the temperaments are just the baseline to assess who we are, but you need to have the qualities of humility, bold, drive, ownership, and problem solving to help you become the great saint that God is calling you to be. So what are these temperaments, okay? First, I want to talk about the temperaments in a just generic standpoint, all right? A snippet to give you kind of an idea, all right? And then I'm going to go into them in-depthly, okay? So the first temperament we have is the sanguine, sanguine temperament. This is the one I kind of fall under. I think this is my predominant one, is sanguine. All right? So I'm going to use Winnie the Pooh characters as kind of the caricatures to help out with that. So just a snippet, sanguine they're enthusiastic, they're active, and they're very social, okay? And I would probably consider that the Tigger temperament. So Tigger, he's bouncing all over the place, and he's jumping, and he's very active. All right, that's the sanguine. So what are some saints that were sanguine? Well, Saint Peter. Okay, how many times where he says one thing and then says something else, right? I would never betray you, Lord, and then I would never deny you, and then 2 seconds later he's denying him, 3 times. So you should also read the story about Quo Vadis, right? St. Peter, when he knew he was going to get martyred, he ran away from Rome. And so as he's running away from Rome, knowing that he's going to, that he was going to be martyred, he sees Jesus carrying the cross into Rome. All right? And St. Peter says, Quo Vadis, meaning in Latin, where are you going, Lord? And, and Jesus says, oh, I'm going to go to Rome to get crucified again. And that's when Peter realized, I need to be the one that gets crucified. So he goes back to Rome and he gets crucified. So, the rashness, right? St. Augustine, what zeal did he have? He lies to his mother and he goes off to Italy out of Africa. But that rashness and that enthusiasm, right? Manichaeism, that's what it is. He was a very big Manichae. He fell for that. And he was exuberant. But that exuberance made him realize that, the Catholic Church, which his mother was preaching to him, is the true church. And so his enthusiasm was turned into becoming a great theologian. St. Teresa of Avila, you read her. She was a feisty saint, but she became, a very holy and contemplative saint. St. Francis of Xavier, went out to conquer and evangelize to the world. A Jesuit, one of the co-founders of the Jesuit order, and he went out. And he would eventually die while evangelizing in the Asian countries. Okay? So, sanguine. Tigger is the one that we use as an example, as the caricature of Winnie the Pooh. Melancholic. Okay? Now, what are they? They're short-tempered, fast, and irritable. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not melancholic. Melancholic are analytical, wise, and quiet. All right. So, melancholic are also kind of melancholy. That's why they're called melancholic. So I call them the Eeyore type. They're the Eeyore. Oh, everything's kind of, I think it's going to rain, even though it's sunny out, right? They have a kind of a, melancholic personality. So who were they? Who were these Eeyore types? Saint Therese of Lisieux. After her mother died, she became a very manic depressant for a while. And so she would be that. Saint Aloysius Gonzaga, Saint Bernard, and Saint John, the beloved disciple. So how about the next temperament is the choleric. The choleric is the short-tempered, fast, and irritable, and I call them the rabbit. Okay, Rabbit in Winnie the Pooh. He's always gardening. He's always kind of very analytical. Very short-tempered and fast. But the choleric actually has a lot of saints and sinners come from choleric. Cholerics are very hard workers. They really are. They are probably I call them the doers. Okay. The sanguine, they're probably the dreamers, all right, in some ways, and the choleric are the doers, okay? And Rabbit was a doer. Rabbit, he was always gardening, he was always, doing things, but he was irritable, right? It's always eating my carrots. So who are they? Believe it or not, St. Francis de Sales was choleric, all right? He would always get frustrated and angry. And there was great stories about how he was able to control that. St. Ignatius of Loyola, okay? Remember, he was a soldier, fought. I can tell you right now, they're very, very short-tempered, fast, and in some cases irritable. And St. Jerome, some of the spats that St. Jerome and even St. Augustine would have sometimes about the Bible would be hilarious. And maybe that's why St. Jerome kind of was in a cave, lived in a cave. So that was the choleric, all right? The next is the phlegmatic, all right? What's the phlegmatic? They're relaxed and peaceful. The people that I look at on that is Rue. Rue was, she's Mama Kangaroo, right? So Rue is phlegmatic. So who's a good example of phlegmatic? Well, Thomas Aquinas, all right? Relaxed, peaceful. There's a story that I believe that at one time he wanted to be a priest, and his parents basically didn't want him to be a priest. They wanted him to get married, because he I think he was born into a very wealthy family. And so they brought in a prostitute, so for him to try to see if he can lose his, desire to become a priest, his chaste behavior. And he basically chased that, ran her out. And so there's a lot of great stories of Thomas Aquinas that has some peaceful and relaxed person. He was called the dumb ox, right? Ironically, he's one of the greatest theologians probably of all times. I don't know. I would have to pit against St. Augustine with St. Thomas, but I think I would probably choose St. Thomas. But that's the Franciscan coming out of me, because Franciscans and Dominicans are really good, buddies. So, but I will say that he was relaxed and very peaceful type of a person. So the phlegmatic, all right, and Rue exemplifies the phlegmatic. Now, again, we're not here to judge people. We're here to know personally ourselves who we are. And one is not better than the other. It's amazing because God is so brilliant. They say that there is not one snowflake. And think about this. How many gazillion snowflakes that have been around throughout time and space. And yet they say that not one are the same. Why? Because even though there's only 4 temperaments, there's different types, there's different permutations that occur, just like in snowflakes. Okay? So let's go more in depth with these temperaments. Okay? So let's first talk about the sanguine temperament. All right? So the sanguine temperament is a person who reacts quickly and strongly to almost any stimulus or impression. But the reaction is usually short-lived. The stimulation or impression is quickly forgotten, and the remembrance of past experience does not easily arouse a new response. So here's the thing about the temperament. It's very emotionally driven, these temperaments, all right? To understand that they're quick and they are very, very strong, all right? So these are the people who will have anger management issues because something triggers them. And for that moment in time, they will be very angry and they will come out really strong with them. And so it's quick and strong. But the key here is that it doesn't last long. Did you ever see, a good example of that are sometimes boys. Boys, they'll get, all of a sudden someone says something, they get real angry and they beat each other up. And then, a couple days later, they're best friends again, right? They're like totally best friends again. Oh yeah, that's what happened, right? But they had this quick reaction that was strong. They had to beat each other up for some reason to do that. Or it's the person who they live in the moment. They're just so, into that one moment. And then it goes off. And they have to live in that moment again. Maybe it's that joke or that, whatever it is. But it's very short-lived. It's very they don't have a very long-lasting effect. When they get angry, it's not going to last that long. They'll forget. They lack the virtue of longevity in some sense. Okay, so here are some good qualities of the sanguine temperament, and we can learn. If you are a certain baseline temperament and you want to grow, then seek out other people's temperaments that help you grow. All right, don't find friends who are your own temperament. It's very easy to do that. It really is. It's very easy to find and become friends who are similar to your temperament. But if you really want to grow, seek out the temperaments that are contrary to yours. So you can analyze them. You can look at them. And I see that even amongst my own children. I learn a lot from temperaments that aren't mine, right? I'll give you an example. Why would if you were trying to lose weight and you were overweight, would you want to hang around with other overweight people? Okay, how will you learn from them? Okay, no, you would want to learn from people who are thin. How are you eating? What are you eating? What's going through your mind? All right. So you learn from other temperaments. So what are the good qualities of the sanguine temperament? Affability and cheerfulness. sympathy and generosity toward others, sensitivity and compassion for the sufferings of others, docility and submission to superiors, sincerity and spontaneity. That's really, you can sum that up with 2 words: fluidity. They're very fluid people. They really, really are. And the second is they have a very high emotional quotient. Okay? They can empathize very well. That's what they can do. They can read people's emotions. And they're very joyful people. All right? So that's what they are. And that's some really, really good qualities to have. Okay? So what are their some of their bad qualities? All right? Some of their bad quality is their violent reaction to injuries received by all, imagine that. Because they're quick, they can be very violent, okay? There's no, these people, also some good qualities, I apologize, is that they have no stubbornness or obstinacy. That's really what's neat. It's very easy for these types of people to be humble, okay? These people can quickly understand failure and react to them. But there's no stubbornness, no ill will or anything like that. Others are attracted by the individual's goodness, heart, and contagious enthusiasm. So they're very enthusiastic, and they're very contagious. Okay, in that enthusiasm. All right. In the business world, these are the best salespeople in some ways. Okay, they're the icebreakers. You ever see the guy that goes into let's say an unknown environment, and they're like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" This is the sanguine. Okay, they're always an optimist. Okay. They're not easily discouraged by difficulties or obstacles. They're the optimists, so why would they be discouraged, right? They have hope to overcome all efforts. Vainglory is one of the things that I would say is one of their banes. So they got to be careful about that. But so in some ways they're a little too over optimistic, but it's there. They have an affectionate nature. They make friends very easily and sometimes love their friends with great ardor or even passion. Their intellects are alert and they learn quickly, although often without much depth. This is very, very key. A lot of times, and I can see it even within myself, we pick up things very quickly and easily, and yet there's not a lot of depth. These people are great leaders. St. Peter was one of them. All right. You remember, St. Peter is a sanguine, saint. Why? Because they pick up things very quickly. All right. And a lot of leaders, especially in business, don't need a lot of depth of knowledge. They need to be able to lead people. And a lot of times they lead them with, with ideas, visions, and enthusiasm. Their memory dwells on pleasant, optimistic things. Their imagination is active and creative. So one of the things about sanguine people are that they are very, creative and active. All right, they're the idea guy. They're very into problem solving. Consequently, they readily excel in art, oratory, and the related fields, though they do not often attain the stature of the learned or the scholars. This is key, okay? The difference between learned and the scholars is that they have a lot of depth in their knowledge. Sanguines don't have a lot of depth. They have enough to lead, right? He says oratory, but I call that leadership, okay? Rhetoric was about leadership. It's about the art of communicating and understanding, okay? So that they're very good at that aspect of it, okay? They'll never be an expert at their field because they lack the depth, like scholars and learned people, but they will know enough. They're good at practical things, okay? Here, sanguine. Lastly, sanguine persons could be superior types of individuals if they possess as much depth as they do facility and if they were as tenacious in their work as they are productive of new ideas and projects. So, in other words, how do you be a success in being a sanguine person, as well as, when I say success here, I'm talking holy success, is about probably 3 elements. The first is they need more depth of knowledge. And I learned that as well. Not just scratching the surface, but really some depth. And we're not talking about at the level of a scholar or a learned person, but enough to really be solid about it. And the second is, virtue in work, all right, so that they could be productive, all right? And so that virtue of perseverance, persistence, it needs to be worked on so that those ideas and projects that come about are utilized, okay, and made to fruition. Now, the best thing that I've done is not only to work on those virtues, but also learning the virtue of saying no. Okay, that's so important because we can start, starting everything, 500 projects, but get nothing done. So I remember, here's a good example of me. And again, I'm a sanguine, my predominant disposition sanguine. I remember when I went to Catholic Family Land the first time, okay, this was back 11 years ago. I think I spent $800 in buying books. $800 in buying books. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if you spent $800 buying books? Do you know how many books I read out of those $800 worth of books? Probably 1. Okay. Year 2, I spent probably around $400 worth of books. And how many of those books did I read? Maybe a half a book. I got to the point, I just went to the last Catholic Family Land. I bought 0 books. Okay. 0 books. So what I learned through those 11 years is the fact that I had this great zeal and idea that I'm going to read all these books, but in fact, I'd read none. So what I do is I created basically a procedure that at any one time, I have to finish a book before I can buy a book. Self-imposed. That's it. Okay. So that I can say no very easily. All right. So it's very important to be productive, to say no to product. You got 100 ideas. I read I think it was, I forget who it was, but I read this little quote that said, learn, if you have 500 ideas, just choose 1. That's all you got to do. So these sanguine people need to learn to say, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay. And then focus their energy on 1 or 2 projects that are out there. Okay. And then finish them to completion to make sure that they are complete. Because they're great starters, but not finishers. So what are the defects of the sanguine temperament? Okay. What are the defects? All right. So the first defect is superficiality. Okay. And I totally agree. Okay. One of the things God has really helped me understand is guile, right? I believe it was a daily mass. It was the feast of Bartholomew. And he's the one that basically said, he was Nathan, and he says, here is an Israelite without guile. And, I kind of didn't know what guile really meant, but I was listening to a homily by the priest on this feast day. And basically he just summed it up and he says, being fake. You are true to your character. That's what you are. All right. And so, and I'm praying, and hopefully I pray to Saint Bartholomew, and we can work on that guileness, the superficiality. Now that doesn't mean that I'm super superficial, but one of the things that we tend to do is we over idealize ourselves, right? So here it is. is due primarily to ease and rapidity with which these persons conceive ideas and creative activity of their own imagination. In other words, we typically think in our own imagination, in our own world. And then when we do that, we overblow ourselves up to be greater. As I mentioned before, vainglory is something that is easily brought about in us, right? And I'll give you an example. When I was in the Marine Corps, before I was in the Marines, I wanted to be infantry. That's what I wanted to be. I was so excited. I know I had this dream I was going to be special operations. I even thought about becoming a Green Beret and everything. And when I went to Paris Island and became a boot camp, that was a big slap of reality, right? That it's not as easy as you think. So it's great to have these vainglory ideas, but we gloss over. And here's the key. Sanguine people, we gloss over the difficult issues, okay? All right? So they make hasty judgments, act with insufficient reason, formulate inaccurate or false conclusions, okay? Here's really key, they are more interested in breadth of knowledge than depth of knowledge. And that is, okay? And that's what makes, Sanguine also great leaders, is that they can have such great breadth of knowledge. But if you don't focus on the depth of knowledge, that's going to be your undoing. Okay. The inconstancy of the sanguine person is the result of the short duration of his impression and reactions. He may quickly go from joy to sorrow, repents of his sins, but may return to them on the first occasion that presents itself. Being rarely moved by the impression of the moment, he easily succumbs to temptation. So here's a really bad part from a saintly standpoint, right? Is that because our impressions are very short-lived, we will be the most sorrowful person in the world, right? Look at St. Peter. St. Peter, who exemplifies this, goes back to the Lord. I love you, Jesus. I love you, Jesus. Lord, how many times do I tell you I love you? And even though he says that, he still betrays them, So he fell many a times, even after he told Jesus, I love you. So it's very, very, short-lived. They easily succumb to temptation because that mea culpa, I'm a sinner feeling isn't there anymore, and then they scurry along and fall into that temptation, okay? So, as a rule, he is not drawn to abnegation, sacrifice, or any effort that is of long duration. So, perseverance, persistence, they need to work on that virtue. For that reason, he has great difficulty observing custody of the external senses and the imagination and is easily distracted in prayer. His occasional periods of great fervor are often followed by discouragement and languor. Okay, so they go from this, high of prayer, and it might last for a little bit, but then they get easily distracted, and then they get discouraged. Okay, from the foregoing, it is evident that sensuality finds easy access to the sanguine temperament. Such persons are easy victims of gluttony and lust. They may react strongly and with great sorrow after they have fallen, but they lack the energy and perseverance to fight against the inclination of the flesh when the passions are again aroused. The entire organism is quickly alerted when the occasion is offered for sensual pleasure, and the strong tendency of the individual to sensuality causes the imagination to produce such phantasm very easily. So what does that mean? What it's saying here is that one of the strengths, okay, as I say all the time, our strengths become our weakness when our weaknesses can't control our strengths. So one of the strengths of the sanguine is they are very creative and imaginative. They use their imagination. They have all these ideas, all right, that's what happens. And then those ideas fall under the pleasurable lust aspect of it. And so we don't have that longevity to persist in the that lust and gluttony area. So The best way for sanguine to help out is they have to work on being regimented. Regimentality is so key. Rules are key. Okay? Following rules, following some kind of regiment schedule. Okay? That will help box things in. And then having the virtue of persistence and perseverance to follow those rules and following those rules as well as schedule that is written in. Because any deviation from them, they will easily fall and succumb to the temptations. Okay? So it's very, very important to do that. Okay? And the third, I would say, is what these rules and schedule is doing is it's actually blocking things out because we're so easily fall under temptation. So if you do that, that will help you out. Okay. Fostering the good and suppressing the bad. Okay. So how do we do that? Okay. The way that we do that is we development and control of any temperament. We have to first learn to love. The sanguine person should utilize his good qualities such as energy, affection, life, and sensitivity, but he should take care that these qualities are directed to objects that are good and wholesome. So in other words, use your schedule and focus your preoccupation on good and wholesome things. St. Augustine says, choose wisely, then love with all your heart. So what we're trying to do is, in some ways, the sanguine is very, very passionate people, right? They're very, very passionate. And so that's why it's so easy for them to get tempted by evil. Well, the big thing is to lead them, show them the good and be passionate about that and love that. That's what you do. All right? To, fight against the evil inclination, that's what you constantly have to do. Notice that, you got to creating these rules and schedules to block out the evil and to focus you on the good, which is God. To overcome superficiality, that's when we overblow ourselves. We must acquire the habit of reflection and thinking a matter through before he acts. So prudence, the virtue of prudence, that's what we need to do. Discernment, okay? That's one of the big things that I had to bring into is the discernment. How do I discern? How do I, reflect, all right? Usually sanguines are good at reflecting, but not discerning and being prudent. And that sometimes means, taking some time to not rashly making a decision, but also reading about the topic, contemplating about the topic, thinking about the topic. All right. So, and then, so that's why you need, it's about giving time, not reacting at that moment in time. One of the things that I've learned is when I get angry and I want to respond to something, I learn to just say, all right, let me hold back, okay, and think about it and maybe give a response later. So that's what you got to do. Okay. How do we strengthen inconsistencies? Well, resolutions. Okay. That's really, really key. Resolutions, doing good works. Okay. Creating a schedule, creating rules, daily examination of conscience, self-imposed penance for failures. Okay. Doing, penance is very, very important. And even long-term penance as well. Not just one like, I'll say 3 Our Fathers and Hail Marys, or, maybe fasting more often, maybe, doing it on a regular basis. Now, I would definitely talk to a spiritual director and doing that before you do that. All right? And then how do we combat the sensuality that this sanguine person have? Constant vigilance. Okay? You have to look at it and say it's a battle. That it's an unrelenting. I always vision that it's a battle. That's how I have to look at it. It's a fight. Okay, we win some, we lose some, but it's a constant battle. All right. And they cannot be an occasion of sin. They don't have the strength. Okay, so avoiding the occasion of sin. All right, and that's with most people, but even more especially with the sanguine. So, and they have to have the custody of the external senses. All right, the custody means here is to control them. Okay, whatever it is, just you got to keep an eye. Your eyes are the most important to keep away from, whatever you read, and those types of things. Don't go on the internet at certain times. Mortification, all right, is very important. That's how we strengthen our will and strengthen our custody of the eyes, is practicing mortification. All right. It would be futile to try to avoid sensuality if one were to leave the windows of the senses open to every kind of distraction and temptation. So without mortification, okay, we're leaving the windows open to see everything. So the custody of the eyes begins with mortification. So I'm going to end it with right now with the sanguine temperament. We still have 3 more temperaments to go, and we'll continue that on our next episode. So let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for another day with Practical Catholic. Let us help us understand who we are through the temperaments that were described by St. Thomas Aquinas. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Take a moment and reflect. What is my predominant temperament, and what virtue can I work on to overcome my vices dominant in my temperament? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we continue to discuss knowing ourselves and the 4 temperaments.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.